Habari gani, karibuni, and asanteni for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Kumbukeni today. We hope you're all doing well. We're looking forward to today's conversation, celebrating one of our wonderful mamas, African mamas, who loved us so much that she sacrificed her own personal life to defend us and advocate for us. So again, my name is Nduku. I am an African woman who is tired of the status quo and who has said enough is enough and is taking action to do something about it, joined by my brothers.
Yes, as they will say in Yoruba, Kudede Woyi, it's time for another heart-to-heart conversation about Africa's position, its contribution to the world. My name is Adesoji, reaching you from the belly of the beast, the mother of imperialists, the mother of empire. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So the
Not
heart
my
of
mother,
empire.
but keep saying it.
The heart of empire, and the one that giving you Shakespeare and the language you're about to start confessing it. So again, I welcome you on to Kumbukeni and Brother Milton.
Shakespeare and all the barbarism.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, karibuni, our family all over the world. Welcome to our weekly Chuokiku, our weekly university. I'm Milton Alimadi in New York City. And today we're going to look at one of our dynamic warrior women, warrior mothers. And we're going to say this is one example where we should not let the enemies of Africa write the narrative and have the final say on who this great woman was.
Yeah.
Back to you, Sister Nduku.
Asante. And last week I spoke about how just wanting a better life and fighting for a better life for Africans is criminalized. And this is such a case where Mama Winnie was criminalized and made to seem like a terrorist is what they called her, just because she fought for her people. So just to begin briefly, in one of the videos that I was doing the research, she says, I am Zanyiwe Madikizela. That is who I am. Mama Winnie Zanyiwe Madikizela-Mandela was born on September 26, 1936 in South Africa. Her mother died when she was 9 years old and she was raised by her father. She says in one of the videos that she was grateful her father raised her as a boy because it prepared her for the tough life that lay ahead of her. And she was happy about that. She was married to Nelson in 1958, a little less than 2 years before Nelson Mandela was first put in prison in 1960. He's taken to prison in 1960. He's released about a year after that, and then he's again arrested, the prison time that we all know of, in 1962. Mama Winnie spent 16 years in prison from 1969, away from her 2 children and the man she loved, and who was also in prison. Mama Winnie served as a member of parliament in South Africa from 1994 to 2000, and again in 2009 to 2018 when she passed away, a total of 18 years in parliament. Mama Winnie Zanyiwe Madikizela-Mandela speaks of the name Winnie being forgotten by everyone, including her family, and being known as Mandela's wife. And she says she became a nobody because she was known as Mandela's wife. At least that's how she felt. And she says the reason she fought at Bradford prison was that it would be known it was Winnie Mandela who fought and not Mandela's wife, and that it was a woman. And she says she wanted to show the oppressors that women will bring about change in South Africa, and they did. Winnie Mandela says it is an individual's choice you make in your life to make a difference. It is an individual choice to understand that my neighbor is not as privileged as I am. Extend your heart to those around you. And that is the democracy you should protect. That is the democracy that should make you have an individual choice. Are you going to make a difference in your life? And we depend entirely on you. Please better our lives so that when I go for good, I know that tomorrow you will be a president. Mama Winnie transitioned on April 2nd, 2018, but her spirit continues to live on through us, and that is why we speak of her today. We chose to do this to celebrate her and to hold her in honor as she very much deserves. For me, this is a very great example of African Pan-Africanism, African internationalism, just going beyond the borders that were put there by others without our participation. Where I am a woman born and raised in Kenya, moved to the US, is living in the US, but I relate to a woman, an honorable woman in South Africa who fought for African people. And I see that fight as my own fight. So again, this is why we talk of her today. Brothers.
Oh yes. You negate to say. I mean, although
You can say it if I negated. Go ahead and say it.
no. It's not. It's not a criticism. It's just an oversight. You negate to say the only reason why the father trained her as a boy was because she was stunningly beautiful, and so she was the subject of so many unwanted advances. That's why the father raised her as a boy, and that
Smart
will
dad.
exactly. So that will play out in the course of her courtship with Nelson Mandela, in the sense that while she was courting Mandela, there was also another guy that wanted to go out with her. And when the advances were spawned, that guy almost committed suicide. That Nelson had to drive Winnie to the guy's bedside just to commiserate with. So it's an oversight. It's not a criticism. Brother Milton.
Well, I want to start my own comments by reading the obituaries, and that gives you a sense of what she faced in her lifetime. This is obituary after she passed. This is from The Guardian, April the 2nd, 2018. Rarely can there have been someone who was called to greatness and yet failed that calling as decisively as Winnie Mandela, who has died aged 81 after a long illness. In Harlem, they called her the Queen of Africa. In South Africa, the Mother of the Nation. In the end, she was neither. Her reputation irrevocably mired in murder and fraud. So that's the New York Times by two European men, of course, David Beresford and Dan van der Vat. So let's see the New York Times version, also on the same date, also by a European American male, Bill Keller. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, whose hallowed place in the pantheon on South Africa's liberators was eroded by scandal over corruption, kidnapping, and murder, and the implosion of her fabled marriage to Nelson Mandela, died early Monday in Johannesburg. She was 81. So before I give my own comments, I would like you comrades to react to these leads, the beginning of these two separate editorials.
It's very typical of their caucasity.
Could you, I caught something, but I don't want to jump the gun. Could you read the first part again, the first one? You read to.
The Guardian?
The Guardian. Yeah, The Guardian. Yeah.
Okay, let me go back.
You said rarely has.
Yes, listen to this one.
Okay.
I'm glad you caught it.
Rarely.
Rarely can there have been someone who was called to greatness and yet failed that calling as decisively as Winnie Mandela, who has died age 81 after a long illness.
Okay. So rarely has someone been called to greatness what greatness are you talking about?
Exactly.
You rob them of their humanity and you expect them not to respond. And you call that calling to greatness. In any shape or form, that person does respond, whether it's even so much as a sigh, they've succeeded because they've spoken up. So whatever you hear from them, whether be it a word, a look, a sigh, even an avoidance, even a walk away, suggests yes, your stupidity has been acknowledged. But then how I respond to whatever it is you prefer to me is my discretion. So how do you determine that someone has failed? So you're saying the only way a black person, a woman, can measure up is if you also then confer that same greatness on them.
Exactly.
So you're saying you've called you, but we also then get to decide that said greatness is rubbish. So the second one.
But before you move to the second one, today is about reminding them who determines whether we see her as great and what greatness we're going to give to her. So this is a white man giving from a white perspective, as Tony
Two white men,
calls
not
it,
even
right?
one.
Two, the white gaze, the white gaze, right? The social structure telling you how you should look to be great, and we're saying, to hell with that. We don't care about it. This is what we, self-determining Africans, refer to as great, and Winnie Mandela is one of our great ones. So go ahead, brother.
All right. So, Carmen, you wanted me to read the second editorial?
Yes, the second one. Yes,
okay,
second
before
one.
I read it, I want to go to the point you are making. They're saying the occupation beginning in the 17th century, the
crystallized in
genocide
1948.
of the indigenous African population who were there, the theft of their land, the theft of their diamonds and their gold, and then the institutionalizing the racism by declaring apartheid the official policy
1948.
in 1948, and the elimination of countless young Africans through the years, including the Soweto massacre, the Sharpeville massacre, the elimination of the leadership, including
Chris Hani,
Sobukwe, Biko, and the many others. That was just a setup to allow you to become great. No, really, that's what they, that's how oblivious the editorial writers are. We gave you an opportunity to become great.
Imagine.
And you failed.
You failed. What else can we do for you?
Because you did not fight this monstrosity that we created for you to defeat in the way we wanted you to do it, so that we could applaud you as being a great person when you died.
And just to add to that, Brother Alimadi, she herself, in one of the videos that I shared in the comments, says, if you were picking up bodies of children on June the 16th, 1976, I cannot pretend that, oh, I suddenly woke up the following day, prayed to God, and I was this angel I forgave. It was a battle. It was a process. It's still a process.
Right. Okay, great. So, okay, let me read the second editorial again, the one from the New York Times. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, whose hallowed place in the pantheon of South Africa's liberators was eroded by scandal over corruption, kidnapping, and murder, and the implosion of her fabled marriage to Nelson Mandela, died early Monday in Johannesburg. She was 81.
See, I'm even now getting a little irritated that we are centering these two white men.
No, but we have to.
I'm actually a little irritated that we are.
No, but sister, we're here to show what she dealt with in her lifetime. If this is these are the obituaries in some of the world's major newspapers. The Guardian, considered to be progressive, yet the Guardian even exceeds the New York Times in maligning her. Not in the body, but in the beginning of the obituary, as if this is what should define her life, not the fact that it was her who globalized the issue of apartheid when Western corporate media was protecting the apartheid monstrosity, because the system they had there was similar to what prevailed in the United States. So even the New York Times, during my research, and I include part of it in my book, you had a New York Times correspondent who later became the managing editor and the executive editor, Joseph Lelyville, writing to his editors and complaining why his article about the apartheid education system was toned down by his editors in New York.
Yeah.
Think about that. They're protecting the system. They're not telling the true story. The fact that this lady was out, arrested, I don't even know how many times, countless times, beaten.
While pregnant at one point.
Exactly, almost lost a kid. The longest stretch being from 1969 to 1970. Some of the torture included being kept awake for 5 days.
Whole week.
The problem is they want the heroes to be somebody who is submissive.
Exactly.
Somebody who says, nonviolence is my philosophy. Kumbaya, nonviolence is my philosophy. Even Julius Nyerere said he was not philosophically a leader of a believer in nonviolence. He said he believed in nonviolence as a strategy. If it didn't work, we should be willing to do other approaches. And everybody knows that nonviolence was not going to work in the case of apartheid, South Africa. In fact, that is why Mandela, who is now celebrated largely as Mr. Kumbaya, actually went to Ethiopia and Algeria and got military training with the FNL and came back to South Africa and launched a guerrilla warfare because that concluded this monstrosity would not yield to Kumbaya and nonviolence. Yet Mandela is not, in his own obituary, demonized because he had concluded that we need to take up arms. Winnie, who was not confined, Mandela's hands were kind of tied because he was confined by incarceration. Otherwise, he would have continued engaging in a violent armed struggle to get rid of apartheid. Winnie, who was not confined for a long time like Mandela, was outside and saw the monstrosity of the apartheid system. And of course, she was not going to sit back and say, oh, let's only go with nonviolence, not only go with nonviolence. Let me just add one more point. There's that, after Biko was murdered in 1977, obviously Biko would have contributed to the struggle massively in the 1980s, but he was gone. So it was left to people like Winnie Mandela. And the 80s was when the apartheid regime was so brutal. Kidnapping, torture, murder, a lot of this has come out when they had the Truth and Reconciliation testimonies. Some of the most horrific types of murders were going on. And Winnie was out there to see this. So at one point, and this is the statement that they never forgave Winnie for, when she said, with our boxes and matches and our necklaces, we shall liberate this country. So at that time, as you recall, the people who were alleged informants for the South African police and secret police were being summarily killed in Soweto and other neighborhoods. And Winnie is entirely blamed for this, as if she's the one that started the killing of the people who were now defending themselves by the only means they had. They didn't have weapons, So this was seen as Winnie instigating this kind of retaliation, when in fact, she had nothing to do with its beginning. And then a lot of people don't know, and this was reported much later, that actually she didn't just come out with this statement on her own. A lot of people don't know that Nelson Mandela actually approved the statement, but Winnie took the fall for it. So Winnie had to be presented as the one who was very radical, the one who was threatening a kumbaya arrangement between the new dispensation that was to come and the ANC. And she never, ever came out and say, you are criticizing and demonizing me for this statement. Well, let me let you know that the statement was actually approved by my husband, Nelson Mandela. And you have to give her credit for that, for being willing to be vilified for something that she actually did not initiate.
And go on.
No, Adesoji, go.
And the group you are alluding to was called the Mandela Football Club, and they ascribed some of those. But unfortunately, these are guys who grew up in the neighborhood and have been watching patterns and series of arrests, and they knew who was up to what. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to take matters into our own hands. And simply because she was, as they say, what's it called? The patron of the football club. Everything then invariably became her lot. There is one thing that I wanted to add to what you mentioned with regards to the series of activities that moved on. It's not so much as the way the media castigated Winnie, but it was the fact that all of the castigation was coordinated. There's a book in the chat, White Supremacy Confronted. If you read it, it gives you an in-depth look at what transpired in those timeline. And one of the things was the United States was trying to get a foothold in, in South Africa. And so in order to do that, they threw a lot of sweeteners the ways the South African government, because at that time, let's not forget, South African government was under sanctions from majority of the world, with the exception of maybe United States, Britain, and France, and the other guys.
Israel had clandestine arrangements.
Exactly. Even Japan had clandestine arrangements. Right. So now one of the things was monitoring all of the anti-apartheid activists within and most especially Winnie. Because Winnie's role, once Mandela was incarcerated, was one of keeping not just the name alive, but also the movement.
Right.
And so everything they had to do had to be, they not only put enormous pressure on her, which some of which you already mentioned, were also the continuous, what do they call it? Banning right. to certain areas,
limitation of where she could move to.
So many of which she challenged and many of which she won. Now, why is that important in the grand scheme of things? Not only is that also, but was the fact that they not only spied on her, they also spied on the entire family.
Right.
So for 18 years, for the first 18 years that Mandela was incarcerated in Robben Island, she could go in there and only speak to him on the microphone. She can touch him, she can do anything. So again, when people then say, but how come, you're allowing Winnie a full grace? She is dealing in untenable times. Another thing that was funny when I was reading up was the fact that Amnesty International was against how they went about their fight. They said because they approved violence, they cannot support the movement.
Despite the fact that they were fighting violence.
And here was the thing. I was at Walter Rodney's launch of children's books, Road to Badu to Africa. These two books here, Kofi Badu and Lashmar.
Nice.
And out of India. And in there was a film. And in the film, a tiny film, and in the film, it said, How is it that people who are oppressed are supposed to wish that you give them freedom? Freedom has never been given in that manner, and it will never. So when we're talking about Winnie, whatever ways Winnie goes about achieving freedom or some sense of humanity, she's entitled to react. You don't incarcerate someone and then legislate for how they're going to react.
Right. And you determine what rules they should apply in fighting the enemy. And comrades, at the end of the day, let's not ever forget that had it not been for the sacrifice, for the blood of sisters and brothers from Cuba, who knows if Mandela would have ever been released?
Exactly.
Who knows if apartheid would have ended, formal apartheid in 1990? So at the end of the day, it involved violent armed struggle anyway.
Thank you. Listen, I'm here all day for it. But we're talking about her and her. I want to start there. Let's start with her love, right, Mandela, and the fact that they've painted this article that you were reading was calling it a fabled marriage, right?
Yeah, the implosion of that fabled.
As if she caused it, right? They cause the harm, and then they turn around and describe you in ways that even they cannot manage to fit in those shoes. But we see her loving him throughout the whole time. In one of the one of the books I put there, which is basically her words to you all, the journal, the entries in her journal while she was in prison. She talks about telling one of the prison guards that she's not gonna go against her husband's will. She's in prison. She's going through the torture, the exhaustion, everything that she was going, and she's still standing by him. She had been married to him less than 2 years when he went to prison, and she still stands by him. And she says, even at the end, in one of the interviews after he's passed away and she's being interviewed, she says, even though we were not together in person, even though we were not in the same space, I still loved him. So, brothers, I don't know if you want to add some more on their relationship.
Yes, I want to add. Obviously, to me, it was very painful to find out that Mandela had not left her in his will, you know. And then maybe I'm thinking, what might have caused that? Was it because by that time he's now married to Gracia Machel, who is also a legend in her own right, and also was the widow of another legend, Samora Machel. Could that have been one of the reasons? I don't know, perhaps. But that to me I found very painful. But here is the irony. 4 days before he joined the ancestors, he was in that advanced stage of dementia and had refused to eat. So Gracia Machel invited Winnie to come to the bedside. And he accepted.
It's actually her daughter who did, but go on.
Okay. Accepted food to be fed by Winnie. And then later on, Winnie told a friend, first he decided to leave me. Now he won't eat without me. And I thought that was very fitting as well. And that Gracia Machel herself said, Winnie was Nelson's great love. So Gracia Machel recognized that as well. So you're right. The love was enduring to the very, very end. And then it tells you, though, how politics and the primacy of politics sometimes, everything else is subsumed. But at the end of the day, as Mandela joined the ancestors, he spoke very, very loudly by allowing Winnie to feed him. You can't say anything beyond that.
Yeah, she even, to add to that event, his last day, she is the last person that he touches before he takes those last 3 breaths. And she speaks of it, where once her daughter calls her because she needs to be there, it's time, the doctors tell her to come closer to him. And he looks at her and smiles and then takes the last three breaths and passes away. So even in that last moment, it was the two of them. They began together and they ended it together. For me, that was just and also I will add this, being a woman who's been in relationships and all that, just the challenges a love can face, and they still come above all of it and stand by each other. That to me was great to see. But
Yeah, sister, what you just said also brought back some, memories for me. I'm my mom's eldest son, and when she was passing, my brother called me and said, "Listen, you have to make it to London, or you won't find our mom." So I got on a flight the same day, the same night. I got there. By the time I got there, she was already unconscious in the hospital. So I would visit every day. And then on the fourth day, I believe, she opened her eyes. And she couldn't speak anymore, but she recognized me, and her eyes just became wider. And she hadn't moved for a long time, but she grabbed my hand.
Yeah.
And she held my hand until she closed her eyes for the final time. So I know how that feels,
Yeah, it's amazing. Adesoji.
Yeah. So, with regards to the romance, from the beginning, it was a dynamic of Winnie. I mean, the first time they met, it was a question of, oh, this man is so famous. What would this man have to do with me? But Nelson was adamant that, in fact, the way he proposed the loan suggests,
Do you want to tell us a bit about that proposal?
No. I mean, I'm talking about it now. So essentially telling her, I know Mrs. X does a very good dress. You want to go to her, and I'm sure she will sew you a very nice wedding dress. Like, what? That kind of thing. So even then, Winnie knew there were two loves. Nelson had two loves. It was the struggle and herself. So she was all in the time in a very complicated relationship. So when he decided he was going to go underground, and the reporters went to Winnie to ask her, she said, what do you expect? He will do what is necessary in the interest of the people. And then the reporter then retorted, so what do you think? It's like, who am I to think anything? The people matter. And that alone is important enough for you to know the extent to which she knew her role with regards to not just being his confidant, but also the fact that there is a battle afoot, and that battle had to be fought, and sometimes there are no fine lines as to how you do it. So the mere fact that even in the course of that, she still managed to see him. But for our cousins in the United States, he probably won't have been arrested. He was, as I said earlier, throwing the sweetener so that people can, what's the word? People can, so that the United States can get a foothold in South Africa. That is how they got to Mandela. And so, yeah, it's funny what relationships will throw up, because when it comes to human dynamics, certain things, there are no rules. So
It's funny as you explain that, Adesoji, I'm reminded of Bobby Wine's wife, who has been standing by him, just like Winnie Mandela stood by Nelson Mandela.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because I
Yeah.
also wanted to add, and I'm glad that she's committed to the struggle. So now, if they want to harm them, they have to harm both of them, which makes it, of course, very difficult and complicated. And also, at the same time, it tells you
how desperate
how
the government can be. How desperate the government can be to do that.
Oh, absolutely. But it also tells you to what extent many African societies and many countries have underutilized the potential of our sisters,
Exactly.
our women, you know, because we have narratives of men in the struggle in African countries being arrested, being locked up, being exiled.
Mhm.
And if the movement were to fully embrace the women in their lives, I imagine we would have many more stories of Winnie Mandela's, uh, uh, Bobby Wines on the African continent. I think that's something we need to stress on our platform, Kumbukeni, as well.
And she actually talks about that in one of the speeches, and we'll talk about it, where she had an event in South Africa with the women, and she says it's upon us women, essentially, to fight the oppressors, because one of the examples she gives is when she speaks about many things, but one of the examples she talks about one of the young ladies there who had told about how she had attempted suicide several times, and she says, this is our fault, we women. This is like, what ball have we dropped that we have one of our young ones getting to the point where they want to commit suicide? We must make sure that we change this situation so that we don't have that happening. So, and the thing about women is we are nurturing again. And I don't want us to seem like we're saying anything against men. I believe the liberation of African people is going to take both the Black woman and the Black man working together. But the thing about women naturally is we're nurturers. And in that nurturing is where you have that love for your community and you want to come out and protect it at all costs, which is why we are such a powerful entity when it comes to the liberation movement, despite all the patriarchy system's effort to shut us down.
And Sankara spoke about that. Sankara fought against that.
I was going to mention that.
Wanted to add that. He said we have to stop giving women token jobs. Let's give them actual, real jobs that we would give to men as well. And that's why he recruited them.
I actually think women should be trained, because even if you're leaving them home, because that's the argument, right? The men go to the front lines and the women stay home and take care of the children. But in case they are attacked, how are they going to protect themselves? Brother Adesoji.
And that's why he trained them in Burkina Faso.
Exactly.
They were trained. And also the women were speaking in public saying now when they go home, they're not going to submit to domestic violence as well.
Exactly.
It changed their attitude, you know.
I mean, funny you should mention that. Sankara actually said it in a quote. It says, women are the mothers of revolution. Empower 60% of the women that make up the population of Africa. You empower, you get an entire continent to stand up. And what did he do? When he came in, most of the lands were held by feudal lords. The men who could not find work had to go to Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, to go and work on plantations and work menial jobs and work. So who was holding the fort? It was women. So when the land redistribution came, it was the women who got the first dips. And so when Burkina Faso went from being food dependent to being food sufficient, it's a result of what the skill set that women brought to bear. And so they also trained their vanguard to, develop, to defend the home front, because women were then incorporated into military. So again.
But Adesoji, I want to add to what you just said in terms of when the men went to work in
Côte d'Ivoire.
This was actually a phenomenon that occurred during the colonial rule as well. As Rodney pointed out, the way when they started mining, and then all the men were literally conscripted and taken away from the rural areas to the urban areas to work in the mines. The women, the work they had, the burden was now even overloaded because now they had to work on the farm as well.
Yes.
To grow the food. The men were never paid enough in the mines to have enough funds to send that, now you can take care of, you don't have to grow food, you can just purchase it. So that was also a phenomenon that happened throughout the colonial history. The example you just gave for Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast.
Mama Winnie talks about plowing her father's cornfields. So yes, but this reminds me very much of my mother, and it would be a shame if I do not mention her as we talk about Winnie and as we talk about her strength and holding up her family. My mother, who despite all the challenges that she has faced, has held us together and been there. So again, as we talk about Mama Winnie, Mom, thank you. Let's talk about her time in prison, and what she went through, her perseverance, and her resilience. For me, one thing that stands out as I was reading her journal, and this is not the only thing, we'll talk about more. At one point, she's contemplating suicide, but not suicide because she's giving up. She is literally thinking if she takes her own life, it will save her colleagues from going through the trial and from having solitary confinement. It will literally end the case because she knows she's the target. So she is thinking, how can I save my people, even to the point of wanting to give up her own life? She never did that, thank goodness. But this is the level of commitment we're talking about for the collective. Brothers, her time in prison. Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, I just like, the time in prison, and then when you come out of prison, you're still in prison anyway, right? You don't even know which one is worse, right? Hopefully, when you're out, you're among the people. So anytime you're out, obviously, you're going to appreciate those moments, the interactions with people that support you, people that love you. But I'm questioning how she maintained her mental health, And I wish there's more discussion about that. That must have been very challenging to not just become overwhelmed and break down and just stop being a part of the struggle. It takes a kind of strength that is, we can't even imagine us, We would need somebody who shared some personal, views with to
She shares them. She shares them in this.
I think you should share a little bit about that because I haven't read that book yet.
Yeah, she shares
them
in this.
I always wondered about that myself for the longest time.
So two ways she looks at it is one way, and it's funny, it addresses that first comment you were making about which one was worse, in prison or out of prison. She saw herself to be privileged to be in prison because she was not running away from bullets. She was not living that constant life of being under police rule. She was safe in prison. So she saw that as a privilege. The other thing she said too, especially when they were giving her those, what are we calling them? For 7 days, constant questioning. What do we call that? Interrogations for 7 days. She said every time her body, her physical body, not her mind, her body would be so tired she passed out. And in those moments she passed out, she found peace. She said she found peace. Those were the most beautiful moments when she was passed out from that exhaustion. And then she said,
and I'm sure, sister, they tried their best. They tried their best to revive her and wake her up.
And she says when they revived her with a bucket of water on her, she was not mad or worried about how wet she was. She felt refreshed and she got up to fight again. So that's what kept her going.
Okay.
She said the fight, the struggle was like opium, she says.
And with regards to her exploits in prison, would only be matched by what she did outside, because what she also helped underscore was, even though sometimes she was incarcerated, she was also incarcerated in public, because there's a limit to what she could do.
Right.
She was robbed of resources at some point. Some of the so-called members of the ANC abandoned her because she was seen to be a wild card.
Right.
But then again,
like we said, the script.
Exactly.
Right. I hope everyone listening is taking note to that. Those who try to change those who are setting the path or clearing the path towards our liberation. But go on, Adesoji.
Yeah. So not only were they disturbing what she wanted to do, not necessarily because she was a lone ranger. It was because sometimes you act accordingly based on the context in time. it's most of the things were not pre-planned, they were reactions. And so they were necessary reactions in the time. But those who came at her often came at her from the point of the fact that they've been able to sit down and analyze the situation and then decided, oh, but you should have taken this course of action. And so one of such moves was when she was making inroads onto the African continent. We had two bodies going outside, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and more recently, the ANC, in terms of that context of timing, because it was the PAC that went out first. The ANC was insular. It was when Mandela went on his tour and, sensitized people outside of South Africa as to what was going on, that Winnie saw that. And so, yes, it is time to Africanize this revolt. And so every time they had the Rivono trial, which was the trial in 1964 to sentence him to life imprisonment on Rhode Island, she came in traditional Tembu cloth and carried her pipe, so she gave it this African identity as an African struggle rather than just a South African struggle. And I think it is that problem that has now reared its head in South Africa. So when you hear this thing about foreigners, most of the people we have to also understand were not educated. And so they were devoid of education as you and I know it. The education they were given was one to follow manual commands. Do this, do that, do this. The suspect of critical thinking, all of that was devoid of them. So only people who were deep in the struggle got any modicum of education. And so those are the people now that are pushing back against, quote unquote, foreigners. You need to go back, because if the PAC mantra was overriding then, Winnie would have gotten more flowers outside, which she did, but she would have gotten much more flowers outside the continent, outside South Africa, as opposed to within South Africa. Because, I saw her when she came to Lagos on numerous occasions. I sat down, listened to her. She was articulating the problem and kept the name of Mandela alive. Because we have to also understand, when Mandela went into prison, there was no picture of him, no audio. So how do you know he was alive? It was only because Winnie was out there doing the job. And so maybe the others, because they didn't have people like that around them. But Mandela was lucky enough to have Winnie, because Winnie kept the fire burning. It was that fire burning that would lead to the battle carnival that Brother Milton mentioned earlier. And it was that fear. It was that fear that not only have the South African Defense Force been pushed out of Namibia, but the fear was that the Cubans were going to come into South Africa. And so they had to hurriedly put in place a process to ensure apartheid was dismantled with everything intact. People will say dismantled. No, it was dismantled in name only. But, essentially the machinery of government, the powers of states, i.e., the economic power, was still very much in the hands of the imperialists. So, Brother Milton.
All right. So I like all the points that you said. I'm just going to touch on some of the same points and add to them. Yes, she continued to advocate the more, quote unquote, radical aspirations of the ANC. And that's why her ally became Julius Malema after he had been kicked out of the ANC. And they kept talking about the issue of the land. As we speak today, the European South Africans, who make up 8% of the population, still own more than 72% of the land. And still, control the major levers of the economy of South Africa. Regarding the issue of Pan-Africanism, you're 100% right. Sobukwe, in his writings, spoke about a United States of Africa, or United Federation of African States. He was a big fan of Nkrumah from the get-go. So he did believe in what Malema is now talking about, the borderless Africa. Sobukwe was talking about that in the 1960s. And you're right about the xenophobia against other Africans. In fact, Winnie Mandela also condemned that many times. He would come out and make public speeches condemning attacks and saying, were it not for our sisters and brothers, we would not have been liberated. But those are the kind of stories that corporate media like, including the BBC. I see them, they like interviewing South Africans who say, oh, we hate these foreigners.
I see that now being a trend, yes.
Oh, they really love those
I don't watch those videos, not to give them cookie, but
they don't talk about the fact that the impoverishment is actually coming because the wealth has not yet been distributed. So they hype up that story of demonizing other impoverished Africans who are coming there because they're impoverished as well. And you're right about how important role in keeping the fire burning. I don't think Castro would have known as much as he knew about South Africa had it not been for Winnie Mandela.
Winnie Mandela,
so who knows if we would have ever seen Kwitokwa Naval. And you say that perhaps there was a fear that they could have gone all the way into South Africa. I think they should have gone at least into Namibia. I think if they had gone into Namibia, the land issue, I think, would have been addressed, you know?
Yeah.
I just to show this time in prison as well. There's this exchange that she has with Madiba. He writes to her when she gets out. I had to wait for 2 weeks before I could send you my warmest congratulations for serving 491, and still emerge the lively girl you are and in high spirits. To you and your determined friends, I say, welcome back. We're at home when you returned. Were I at home when you returned, I should have stolen a white goat from a rich man, slaughtered it, and given you Ivanya Ntloya, I can't say that, to down it. Only in this way can a beggar like myself fit and honor his heroes. And she responds, in a way, during the past 2 years, she's referring to her time in prison, I felt so close to you. It was the first time we were together in similar surroundings for that length of time. Eating what you were eating and sleeping on what you sleep on gave me the psychological satisfaction of being with you. So the levels of mental discipline, she found peace in knowing that, or at least peace from worrying about Nelson, in knowing that she was eating the same food and sleeping on the same surface as he was in prison.
You mentioned, what's it called? Brother Milton, you mentioned the passing of Winnie and what it brought to the fore. And you also mentioned the name of Julius Malema. There's a video online if people want to watch it, where Malema was delivering the eulogy at her finger. And there's this one phrase he kept on repeating every time he said something. It says, they are here, Mama. Give me a sign, Mama. And at first,
you mean the ANC members?
Yes. Her betrayers.
So at first I was wondering,
you've not seen that video, Milton?
No, I haven't, but
you need to see it.
The minute you said that, yeah, Mama, who else could it be?
So when he was, and I watched it because I watched it live. So I was thinking, what's he saying? So his speech was about 30 minutes long. I'm not sure if the 30 minutes is on there, but there's snippets of it on there.
I have to interrupt you because imagine, I think the ANC leaders who were there must have been feeling so uncomfortable.
He didn't even mince his words.
Are we going to be attacked by people here?
He didn't mince
I'm sure a few of them considered leaving.
No, because he gave hints as to what he was.
He did.
Exactly. He gave hints as to what he was alluding to, because he said, Mama, Mama, we know the kind of struggle you went through. And I'm just paraphrasing now. We know the kind of struggle you went through. But, Mama, I want to tell you, they're here, Mama.
And they're ready. And he said,
Give
and they're
us a
ready.
sign, Mama.
That is
And
so
then he
scary.
talked about the land. After speaking about the land, the problems they went through.
Yeah.
Yes, Mama, they are here. They are here, Mama. They're
Very
in their
intense.
finest. They're in their finest robe. They're crying.
They're crying.
They're crying the most painful tears.
No, that's
You know.
spectacular. That is so
And just to
spectacular.
address your point, Milton, every time he said that mama thing, the crowd, wow.
The
Whoa.
crowd just went, you know, the crowd just went berserk. And so when he was talking about at the end, he says, we all know how they got you separated from Nelson, Mama.
Right.
Yep.
We all know what they did, Mama. So give us a sign, Mama. That was a sign-off call. And everybody was looking at because
Listen.
he greeted everybody that was there, you know, you right honorable, everybody. And then he says, and also the rest of them are here, Mama. Give us a sign, Mama. So he kept going to that. I'm like, okay. And so the camera will pan.
Okay. So a number of things happened even after that. No wonder. Now I understand how the ANC started echoing a lot of what Malema was saying, because that even made him much more powerful and influential after that funeral. Then I wasn't aware of, you know, the actual. I just read about, you know, the funeral.
Brother Adesoji should make your day and send the video to you so that you can get some good satisfaction.
Definitely.
I'll send it. I'll share it.
Yeah. No wonder they started talking about land redistribution without compensation and all that too. Okay, now I see.
I also want to show her brilliance, right? Not just her resilience in prison, but her organizing brilliance. So let's talk about her and her organizing, and how much of a role she played in bringing the community. And she talks about those days as the days of the masses. It is the people, the women with no shoes, the people who had like no work, no money. They're the ones who came out to fight for their country. So let's talk about her brilliance, the things that she did that make it such a powerful movement.
Well, I think the training also as a social worker, you know, that laid the foundation. And then, of course, when she was banned, imagine, you know, can you imagine being banned for like, what was it, 8 years?
8 years, yeah.
Yeah, you only can interact, I think, with your neighbor or something like that. And yet was able to organize a clinic and make sure the clinic was functioning until the apartheid regime closed it. And then I think being within the structure of the ANC, you know, the ANC has, of course, many of its flaws, particularly now that big money is involved. But in the initial stages, they had a reputation for being very well organized, being very well disciplined. So she definitely was also a beneficiary of the early version, you know, of the ANC.
And also, when you say organized, when Brother Nelson went into prison, Chris Hani will often, you know, speak to her as to, you know, what direction it will take. And so it's funny that one of the first persons or one of the last persons that will be killed before apartheid itself was dismantled was Chris Hani. Because Chris Hani was adamant that if we don't talk about the land, you might as well keep apartheid.
Right.
We're not going to have...
The same thing with Biko.
Exactly. So we're not going to have this. So you sort of knew where her politics lied, and it was with the people. And she was very clear, unapologetic. And yes, you know, like the series of articles you read earlier where she was called to greatness.
and failed decisively failed, according to the Guardian. Not only failed, but decisively failed.
Decisively,
And who was doing the calling? But
so,
go on.
And so, yeah, so I mean, that's one of the reasons why she failed, because I mean, she never quite read the memo that it gets to a point you start giving your oppressors flowers so that they can be nicer to you. That way, maybe, just maybe, you might be called to the table while the rest of your kind are, still scratching, which is what has now transpired with the ANC, because poverty is still at an all-time high. And because, again, the people have not been centered in the so-called liberation. Right. What you now have is, as Chinua Achebe would say it in Man of the People, that a few of our leaders have scrambled for their houses that the masters left and have now bolted in the door and told us to work hard, and then one day you too can come inside the house.
Absolutely.
So
that's a classic book, by the way.
Sorry.
Post the title also.
Yes. A Man of the People. Yep. I'll put it there.
Yeah, because most people just know things fall apart, but this one is just as much a classic to assess and understand post-colonial Africa. I agree totally.
I was this is also mentioned in the book. She talks about a lot of because the investigations and the questioning was on how they were coordinating. Tanzania comes up, so this was the first time I knew that she was coordinating with people in Tanzania, or at least they were doing some coordination. But at one point, she's talking to one of the brothers, her comrades, and he's trying to connect them with an individual. And she asks him, this is just her situational awareness and her smarts. And she says to him, wait, isn't that the man who did this to us? Like, as far as like who has betrayed us before? And he hesitates, but finally he says yes. And immediately he tells this gentleman. And this gentleman says, first of all, she asks him, why are you connecting him with us when you know he's done this and he could do this? And he says, well, I'm the only one who's gonna fall. And she says to him, no, anything that happens to you, like you being involved in anything, is gonna affect the whole group. Just that level of awareness as far as bringing a whole community together and keeping them safe. For me, I found it very, very admirable. So.
All right. So, sister, you mentioned Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania was very critical in training Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the ANC military wing. But also in saying that, when we look back, we have to really admit that the level of Pan-African cooperation in fighting apartheid was just phenomenal and remarkable. That's where African people and African leadership are on the same page. But when it comes to the Pan-Africanism we need for a United States or United Federation of African Nations, you find that people are more on the front line, but the leadership, of course, are not, because they don't want to yield sovereignty. So that just struck me as I'm listening to you talking about Tanzania. I think in many of our presentations, we have to keep reminding our people to put pressure on the leadership by any means necessary, even if some of the leaders need to go, because they've become an obstacle to what we need, which is a borderless Africa. Let me put it like that. Some people don't like a United States of Africa because it sounds too similar.
I don't like it. I'm one of those. I don't want it to be United States.
So let's stick with borderless Africa for now.
Exactly.
From now on, I'll use that term. But that's what we ultimately need to actually control our destiny.
You brought in Tanzania. Tanzania, for those who are unaware, is actually pivotal to a lot of what happened. I mean, not just Tanzania, of course, but Tanzania and Ghana. Those two in particular played a key role a key role in the liberation of Africa,
Right.
and vis-a-vis in the liberation of South Africa. Nkrumah
Absolutely. Yep.
actually gave, lots of resources to the ANC. And how did he get to champion this? It was Winnie, who was the interface between Ghana and the ANC. Because
This is a great story.
every time the issue of South Africa came up, Nkrumah, through his various contacts, in fact, people should read the Rhodesia Files, which goes extensively into how he gets to build a network, write letters to people that you might not think he will get to. And he will, there'll be a letter on your doormat from, and not one page, might be 10 pages from Nkrumah, So again, going back to Tanzania, like you said, was key in the training of not just in Kumbukeni, the Frelimo,
Many others, right?
Swapo,
Right.
many others got their training there.
Right.
And who also came through there?
The Patriotic
Walter
Front,
and Malcolm.
Yeah, so Malcolm came through, Walter Rodney came through, Angelo Davis came through, Stokely Carmichael came through. What's his now, if you now bring it back into the kind of things they were able to, kind of ideas they were able to import back into South Africa, they laid this at the doorstep of Winnie. It's like, how do you want to proceed? Because the United States saw the ANC as part of the Red Scare.
It's funny, communism does come up a lot, yes.
Yeah. But you see, that's the thing. I was at, like I said earlier, I was at the film. I've not mentioned this. I was at the film premiere today in London as part of the film festival, where there's a film coming out on Walter Rodney. It's titled The Things They Don't Want You to Know. There's a part in the movie there where he mentions this. He says, it is important that people not only understand communism, but people don't understand capitalism.
Right.
And so you're almost like in a boiling pot.
Yep.
And the pot is getting hotter and hotter because you've been inured to the pain. And so you think, if only I work a little harder, I will get there.
Right.
Not knowing that you need each other to survive.
Right.
You've been sold this lie about this individual lifestyle. And,
and comrade, that lie has been exposed, almost exposed a number of times.
Yeah.
During the Great Depression, had it not been for the intervention of socialism light, that's what it was, right? That saved this country possibly from revolution.
Even the end of the Second World War.
Same thing.
It was the same thing, but this time it was named the Marshall Plan.
Exactly.
In 2008.
I was about to bring that one too. That was the most recent one, right?
It was named the bailout.
Same thing as
the lies are constantly exposed, but the people, long as the so-called crisis is over, they go back to what the fella call a zombie walking, right?
I consider the GI Bill as part of that too, when the soldiers came back. Yeah, that's where they supported the white soldiers to help them get homes. Yeah,
right.
Yep.
I'm glad you clarified that, right?
Oh yeah, they only did it for the white people, so they do come together and use collective money to support their people. And then they make us think that that's not a good thing to do, and we fall for it.
And also on a regular basis, the tax breaks and write-offs that corporations get on an annual basis.
I also missed this the bailout for the automobile industry. What is the popular refrain for capitalists? They would say it shouldn't. Nothing is too big to fail. If it needs to fail, it needs to fail. But unfortunately, not in their industries.
Not capitalism.
Individuals can fail, but not a city bank. Are you crazy?
And I like that we are taking their own words, that nothing is too big to fail. So capitalism too can fail if we want a better life for ourselves. I like that. Going back to Mama Winnie, and this is the thing about talking about Africa and revolution. And I feel that she would be here smiling because these are things that she was concerned about. But we talk about one woman, Mama Winnie Mandela, and through speaking about her, you end up talking about other things affecting Africa, because this is the life of African revolution. That there are so many tentacles to the oppression that we are facing, and we are so interconnected with the system that is oppressing us that it's going to take crazy. Honestly, it's going to take crazy, which is what they're labeling her. It's going to take a revolutionary. It's going to take people who are not worried about how the white gaze views us to take us out of this system. And my thing, this is what I was going to say, as far as the criminalizing of Mama Winnie Mandela, is that we failed her. We allowed it to happen. And we keep allowing the criminalizing of our revolutionaries to happen. And it's a high time that we as Africans say enough is enough. And every time they come for them, we stand up strong. Like when this was happening, there should have been many. And I'm glad finally we have many Black African outlets, media outlets, writing, video and all, that come out and said no at that time. So when it happens again now, we all need to start coming out and saying she's our she's great, right? When they post something like she's not a great, she failed, we put out something that says quite the opposite. Alimadi.
No, absolutely. And I think since we're talking about transformation, and we saw her connection to the youth,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me was the most admirable thing, her faith in the young people and transformative.
Yes.
Ultimately, yes, Cuba completely weakened the South African military and sowed fear within the South African establishment. At the end of the day, it also still took the young people to come out on the streets with COSATO and the United Democratic Front. They built the ultimate movement that brought down the apartheid regime. But now we are still faced with the reality that we only removed the superficial apartheid. The essential apartheid still remains intact. And that is the battle that, of course, the Julius Malema generation are now fighting. But we're also seeing, of course, the attempts at transition in West African countries right now. I don't think any African country is going to be immune. So either some of the political leaders will try to get one step ahead of the young people in the military. Otherwise, I think we'll definitely see some more military takeovers in other African countries. And I think at some point it will not be confined only to West Africa. You know, the militaries in East Africa are also observing, and of course the political class observing, and in Southern Africa as well. And I think within the next 5 years, we might see some very interesting transformation on the continent. I think Niger is a bit different because Niger has now exposed that there are occasions when the US is willing not to just wholeheartedly commit itself to France's agenda. I think the US learned from the debacle in Libya. If the US had not learned from Libya, I think they would have gone in by now, the US and France, in trying to reverse Niger. But they see the people coming up in massive numbers on the streets, and they think this is beyond just a coup now. Now they're having conversations about things that never got media attention. You know, the exploitation of Niger's uranium, the exploitation of resources in other West African countries. Well, pretty much every African country is subjected to that kind of exploitation.
True.
And that's why I say there has to be some significant change and transformation, either through the political class quickly starting to sprint ahead and just stop with superficial reforms, or the military are going to intervene as well.
But as you say that, let's remember that Baba Walter Rodney tells us that it has to be the masses this time that we involve in the change, in order for us to actually get true change. She mentioned something about the state of South Africa, and she says it's very unfortunate that they continue to celebrate democracy in the current state of South Africa, where they all know that it is not ideal. And she hopes that something will be done about that. But I'm glad that someone actually said it's painful when you watch these things happen about Africa and no leader. It's almost like you said, the zombie effect, right? You wonder, are these people not awake? Are they not? Do they have no common sense? Where we need to stop celebrating democracy when things are not right.
Well, I think the problem is that in many African countries, and not only African countries, around the world, and even here in the US, capitalism is often confused as being synonymous with democracy.
Exactly.
When in fact, capitalism, as Nyerere said, is actually antithesis
Exactly.
of democracy.
Exactly.
You have money. In the US, you can't articulate your ideas effectively because you don't have the resources. And that pretty much is how the system now works in many parts of the world, including in Africa as well. So our people need to be taught that.
You mentioned the power of the media, which goes back to how first Winnie was vilified in the media, how Nelson was vilified in the media, and what they seemed to be advocating for was called radical. Now, fast forward 1990, and what has been sold to the South Africans is it's not the land. It is the foreigners that are stopping you from getting ahead.
Exactly. Look at that propaganda.
It is not capital, but it's the fact that you're not educated enough. And so in researching for this episode, it kept pushing me back to, and I resisted as much as possible. It kept pushing me back to NYT, the New York Times. And I don't know why. And then something just ring true, like, but why are you fighting it? Because you've already been told in this book how the media manufactured hate.
I was waiting for the head to come up.
The book that they don't want to print.
So
Listen.
I mean, I kept going there. I much as possible. I wanted to I've read it. There is nothing new there. Come on, you're gonna be giving that brothers too much kudos. Well, I don't want to read it again. But the truth be told, some of the headlines in here are so shocking. Some of the headlines on the articles that I researched to look at what they written down about not just Winnie, but also South Africa in that timeline,
right,
were so demeaning. It was, how can I say? It was disturbing. But then I was reassured by something that I wasn't going potty. There was a tiny line in one article. And that article, it says, sorry, no, it's not in the article. It's in Gerald Horne's book, A White Supremacy Confronted. In there, he says, the reason why South Africa and the USA were able to, move symbiotically was the fact that they were effectively a copy of each other.
Right. Absolutely.
And so why are you expecting anything different?
Yep. Absolutely.
And that just, once I read that, just like, okay, so it is what it is then. Let's just do what we need to do. give give Winnie Mandela her flowers, and keep it moving, because you're expecting them to change. The system is acting as intended.
Yes,
Absolutely.
indeed.
So now let me read a little bit of the obituary of Nelson Mandela, because Winnie took the fall and absorbed all the negativity that should have been more widely shared, right? So this is Nelson Mandela's obituary, December 5, 2013, in the New York Times. This is the beginning. Nelson Mandela, who led the emancipation of South Africa from white minority rule and served as his country's first Black president. I have no problem with this part, but listen to this part. Becoming an international emblem of dignity and forbearance, died Thursday night. He was 95. So Winnie did not deserve any part of that. Winnie was not dignified. That to me is what caught my attention the most. And forbearance.
Which newspaper is this?
This is the New York Times.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I actually now I'm starting to get an idea. She's long transitioned, but maybe we put out a challenge for people to write an obituary for her, an African obituary for her, where we speak and say what we thought of her.
Listen, I would publish that happily.
Let's do that. We
Black
Africans, let's.
In fact, what you
it
should
out
do,
there.
if you write it before the 26th, it'll be like it's birthday celebration for her. So we can have it on the same day. See? There you go. There you go.
All right. Okay.
I just want to mention something in that piece you wrote. The piece said the first Black president. What the media fails to understand. Did they give context as to why he's the first Black president?
That's hilarious. Look at you. I missed that. Lord, these white people are trifling, man. I'm sorry. These white oppressors are something else. Like, we need to have a mass movement of just countering the nonsense.
That's the power of the media for you.
No, we will. Let's work together with our global family on Kumbukeni as we continue, and then we'll develop other platforms. Of course, we already discussed this, so just a question of time.
Yeah.
We'll develop that other platform where we can discuss and critique and break down the continuing media demonization, sometimes directly by commission, sometimes by omission. Remember a few weeks ago, I spoke to you comrades about The Economist. I had a story.
Yep.
About, Mugabe taking the land away that had been acquired by settlers. Acquired, right?
These people are
forget about the genocide.
My stomach turns every time you read these. Go on.
The Matabele and the Shona, in order to quote unquote acquire that land. That's in The Economist, and it takes people who make it a dedicated effort to challenge. They don't do it unconsciously. They know what they're doing. You see?
They do know
so
what they're doing.
It's up to us that can pick it up, to completely lambast them, to challenge them, to expose them, because that makes it difficult for them to do it again. But so long as nobody comes forward and critiques it and gets it out, why should they stop?
Of course, because again, the media Okay. The media essentially has it's called the fourth estate, isn't it? It's a beast depending on who has it, who controls it. The shocking thing is Africans are oral people. We tell stories, but oftentimes are not. Our stories are not there. And so what we don't have is, great storytellers. I was reading uh, The Black Man's Burden by, what's his name? Basil Davison.
Right.
And again, as much as you read it, as much as you see him trying to center Africans,
Yeah.
you can't help but feel the drip
Right.
of imperialism sometimes.
Right.
Still,
I'm thank you said that because
Mm-hmm.
I use him. I use him in my classes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask my students, could you detect he was actually, compared to his contemporaries,
Yes.
one who was out there telling the African story. But could you detect that sometimes he could not go all the way?
Yes.
And they all take pleasure in being able to take that. As okay, so if you can detect
the subconscious racism
from Basil Davidson,
mm-hmm.
then you're prepared to detect the ones who really hate us and are against us very easily.
Very easily.
Find that to be the case.
Yeah, very easily. I mean, there's another guy who writes. Again, he also is of the, what's it called? He also is of the Basil Davidson school, Martin Meredith. If you read any of Martin Meredith's books,
I haven't read it, but I have his books.
Okay, so
State of books,
State of Africa,
yes,
Fortunes of Africa,
yes,
Nelson, a biography. I'm looking at all of them. Let me see which other one here. Mugabe. Please don't read, whatever you do, don't read Mugabe.
Okay.
Please, whatever you do. Oh my God, don't read his Mugabe.
Are you using some reverse psychology?
No, I'm
Adesoji?
sorry, I'm serious. Don't read his Mugabe.
Yeah. At
don't.
one point, they just lost it.
It's
when it came to Mugabe. Even the ones who are moderately logical just completely went nuts.
So how about we hold this conversation on these people, and maybe we do another episode on media, and we come back to Mama Winnie. But before we do that, I'll also put out another thought that because we may not have the time to, and if we do, we will do this as well. But this is an idea for we Africans as we self-determine, and as we see these articles coming through, for us to start putting out videos where we read them, we analyze them, just like we did right now here, and call them out for the false narrative, and we counter it.
Oh, definitely.
So let's have millions of videos going, reading these articles.
To submit also, because once you start doing it, people are going to start becoming detectives also.
Mm-hmm.
Detecting this and sharing it with us and sharing it with others. It can be done.
Yeah, let's do that. But let's talk about her and women. And for me, again, shared in the comments was a resource where she speaks herself. Mama Winnie says that she was criticizing the celebration of Women's Day once a year, and she's not for it. She absolutely is not for it. And she's talking about the fact that women should be celebrated every year, and the reason why we have so many problems is because we don't celebrate women every year. So let's close with our last thoughts on Mama Winnie as we wrap up.
I can relate to what she meant. She probably, meant that this would just end up in being tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
It should be on a daily basis. So in that respect, I'm of mixed feelings because it's not celebrated on a daily basis. It's not going to be celebrated on a daily basis for a long time. Mm-hmm. So if there's an occasion that can be devoted to making sure we focus on recognizing the achievement of women, at this point, I would say we should continue doing it.
Adesoji.
Okay. Winnie Mandela, Mr. Mugo, Fela Nicola, I say Fela Funlayo Ransom Kuti,
Yes.
Aita Ama Ado, Emechi Buchita, Buchi Emechita, Florent Wapa. I mean, Mathari,
One guy, Mathari.
one guy. So these are just examples
Right.
of women whose name should be on the lips of every African. But again, we have to talk about the power of the media. There's a saying that an old African proverb, until the lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will continue to glorify the hunter. So the article Brother Milton read earlier was by the hunters.
Yep.
So you have to write your own story. Hopefully we've written one today for Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. And so everybody, you can write your own. Start writing stories. And, as they will say, in South Africa, Amandla. So
yes, as we wrap up, we are changing the narrative, and from today on, it will be known that we Africans recognize Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela as one of our greats, as a hero, as a woman who dedicated her life to her people and who showed the best qualities of an African woman, and we thank her for that. As we wrap up also, I'd like to say thank you to another powerful woman who stood by a powerful man and who still continues his work, Mama Patricia Rodney. I want to thank her very, very much because she has given Kumbukeni the permissions to go ahead and have weekly readings of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, so that we can get that message that Baba Walter Rodney wanted to get to the masses. Because there are those of us Africans who cannot afford to buy that book, and we're going to get that message to you. And to you who can afford, I say our way of giving back, that collective economics, that ujamaa, is for you to buy those books so that you can cover that loss for the Walter Rodney Foundation, or to send donations to them on their website, so that they can do the work that they do.
Sister, I'm just following up on what you just said. The groundings with my brothers.
That's exactly what
I always have at least 6 copies of this book that I give to friends. I give to new people that I meet that I know want to learn and get knowledge. So once I walked into the Strand, they had 6 copies, and I purchased all 6 copies. And it's not that expensive. It's like
it's a gift. $10. Christmas is coming up. These are gifts like that you can buy. That's how you'll support this work. I agree with
everything you just said.
Thank you.
Buy books for those that can't or don't know about the book.
I'm just about actually.
Unfortunately, I can't give mine away because mine was signed yesterday.
Oh, show off! Look at him showing off.
And what's it called? I also got my.
You forget she lives in the US. We have access to her all the time.
Oh well, but at least she signed mine first. So that's it.
Good job, comrade. Good job.
Oh Lord, have mercy. So, I'm about to finish a review on the groundings, which I'm looking forward to sending to Mama Rodney. But this is the kind of work we do, so that we can give this work to those who cannot afford. Those of us who can have to fill that pool of resources, so that the work can continue. We as Africans have to take care of ourselves, and it's only going to take us to improve our conditions. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us as always. All 40-something at one point people that came here, we thank you very much. If you want to reach us by email, the email is kumbukeni1@gmail.com. You can join our Patreon family. It's been a little inactive, but you can join it to support the work. Patreon.com/Kumbukeni. You can also subscribe here on YouTube, youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. And we thank you all, and we wish you a very, very good day. Asanteni. Kwaherini.